Okay, everybody, Venerable Robina is about to enter. So if those who would like to prostrate would like to do so.
Hello, everyone. Okay. How about questions? Questions. We've talked about karma. We began the Four Noble Truths. We start to look into the subtler level of suffering called the suffering of change, which is what we call happiness. And to understand that, we have to understand attachment. So any questions about all that? No questions? Amy?
Venerable Robina, we did have a few questions before the break, but we're just having to re-find them because we've started a new meeting. So we'll find them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Here, this is it, isn't it?
Okay, you got them?
Got it? Good. Talk to me.
Okay. So from Jess, would it be correct to say that applying the concept of karma to your experience of attempted robbery all those years ago with your sister, was that experience similar to the cause?
What attempted robbery?
Jess, would you like to maybe clarify your question?
Oh, you mean
Yes,
you mean when someone held us up with a gun?
correct, yes.
Oh,
Thank you,
okay,
Venerable.
yeah. I'll tell the story. Okay, I'll tell the story. Thank you, Jess.
Okay,
So
no worries.
what happened was actually a funny story. I've got some background, not necessary, but it's a funny story. Janet, my older sister Janet, and I had lived in London for many years, and we'd been very involved in kind of radical left politics. Seriously, I mean, really seriously. We were part of a group called the Friends of Soledad, which was supporting George Jackson and the Soledad brothers, the Black Panthers, way back in 71, 72. So, I'd been, we'd really serious radical lefties in our philosophy. And so Jan, especially my sister Jen, and then also me for a bit, we used to shoplift. We were shoplifting. We used to, this noble idea of, you steal from the rich and you give it to the poor. So we'd go down Oxford Street and I'd steal a few. I mean, we're very humble thieves. We wouldn't steal thousands of pounds. We'd shoplift hundreds of pounds of, things from Selfridges and places and send them home to our family for Christmas. It was kind of ridiculous. Anyway, and this idea that, you're stealing, all that rubbish. So anyway, I'd given it up, I think. Jan was the one who was really into it. So we went to New York in 1974. She didn't like the place at all, but I loved it. Anyway, the point was, one day we were going to the Lower East Side. We didn't know much about it because, it was a terribly dangerous place. People said you would never walk at night, no way. I remember women wore bells around their necks, and New Yorkers have about 4 locks on their doors. They call them police locks. There are bars, padlocks. I've never seen anything like it. It was unbelievable. So anyway, we went to this Irish pub on the Lower East Side, which is super dangerous. We didn't know that. And we're walking back casually at 2 a.m. and Janet had her glass of wine because she still was into stealing a bit. So she had her glass of wine with her. We're walking on the street and suddenly out of the blue, this dude turns up and he has a gun and he puts it in my chest. I'll never forget. I'd never seen a gun before, but I remember thinking, like when you read in books, cold gray metal. That was the thought that came into my mind. It was indeed cold gray metal, the little handgun. And he had it in my breast, between my breasts, right? So anyway, I hadn't been held up before. So the main thing I remember about this event was what happens. I'm a quite aggressive person and quite get whatever. And other things have happened in my life when men have been violent with me. Type of men, it's kind of common for women to be whatever. So anyway, I got mad at him. First of all, there was fear, and he was about 2 inches from my face, and he was saying, "Give me your money, bitch." Excuse me swearing. "Give me your money." So I remember him saying, "Give me your money, bitch." And I remember Jan was standing to the side with her glass of wine. And what I remember was, I got immediately angry, and then I got very logical. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I said, I don't want to swear too much here, but I swore at him. I said, "Excuse me, mate," or whatever I said. "Like you, man." I said, "We're just as poor as you. You give us your money." It was so clear to me that we were poor as well, and he's this fellow trying to steal our money. It just seemed absurd, not logical, So there's so first of all, I think for him it was such a shock to get this response. And also because we had English-sounding accents. So in America, I tell you, as soon as you sound like an English person, you're like the Queen of England. You're posh, you know. So it's always a shock for them to hear this. So I'm saying, shouting at him. He's about 2 inches from my face. But I remember very vividly realizing that he was more afraid than me. He was quite a young guy. And then I remember Janet, every now and again, Jan would suddenly say, "Hey, brother, have some wine." You know, and he's like, "I don't want your fucking wine, I want your money," you know. So this absurd back and forth, me shouting, "Give me your money." And I was being really like his mum, giving him a lecture, you know. "Who do you think you are? How dare you?" I said. "How dare you? We're as poor as you. You give us your money." He was so shocked, you know, the whole thing. And then here's this ridiculous other woman saying, have some wine, you know. So in the end, he just gave up. He ran away and gave up. It was too much for his poor mind. You know, he didn't get any money either. We didn't get killed, obviously. So anyway, your question, Jess, was, what's your question?
Yeah, so my question was applying the laws of karma to that particular experience. I was curious to know whether that experience, that negative experience happened to you. So if we were applying the laws of karma, would that be experiences similar to the cause? And then your response to that is your tendencies.
Experience similar to the cause of what?
Well, I guess I'm just asking. Yeah, the action that he kind of did towards you, which was a negative thing.
What would have been the result? What would have been the cause that we did to get that? Because I mean, we didn't get stolen from, so it can't have been stealing, because we did not get stolen from. So it was obviously it was violence and threatening. So that's from harming him in the past, obviously. So that would have been the experience similar to the cause to something like that, being threatened and being potentially harmed. But we didn't get harmed in the end. He was the one who probably went kind of miserable, and we didn't get stolen from. So clearly, of course, yes, clearly, everything, every second. And that's where if you use this kind of 4 ways that karma ripens and interpret your life every second, you just, I mean, it's fairly evident. If someone punches you in the nose, that's not the result of being kind to somebody. If someone steals your money, it's fairly evident that's from stealing. If someone doesn't pay your bill, it's because if you haven't paid you haven't stolen, or you've been mean. It's sort of not too complicated. Obviously, the subtlety of it is much more than that. But fairly, things happen to us, you know. It's yeah. So that's, of course, it is experience. The result similar. The experience similar to the cause of something like that. Yes, exactly, Jess. And our response to it, I mean, well, you know, my response anyway. And in the end, see, that was an extra thing. And what I learned from that experience, this is an interesting point, actually. What I learned from that experience was just completely instinctive that it happened that way, because I'm just how I am. I learned that when there's no fear, there's no suffering. I didn't suffer from that at all. It was like a party joke. I had no problem. I didn't stop walking in the streets of New York, you know, and even later on, other things happened to me. I've got, you know, different things happened to me in relation to being, you know, violence, but I wasn't afraid. That was a very powerful learning for my mind. It wasn't any trauma at all. If anybody had trauma, it was the poor guy, you know. So that I found that quite a powerful learning, actually. When there's no fear, there's no suffering. That's exactly the Buddha's point. It's very interesting. Do you understand, Jess? Okay, good. Thank you so much. I mean, I haven't been held up since. A few other things have happened, but not like that. Any more, Amy?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, where did it go, Jason? Oh, thank you. Yes, a question from Alfred. Oh, where's it gone?
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just having a little technical difficulty getting the question back. We'll just be a moment.
Okay. Well, there's Alessia. Alessia's in Rome, so she's like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Well done, Alessia. Hello, Rosetta. You're there. How are the salvos today? Good. She's been cooking with the salvos for about, we call them Australians. Oh, you are Australian. I shouldn't be talking to you like this. I keep having to tell Americans how we shorten every word. It's probably most of you Australians, except Alessia wouldn't know that. She'd never know if we said she's been cooking for the salvos, Alessia. You'd never know that meant the Salvation Army unless you've been to Australia. We shorten every single word. We don't wear lipsticks, Alessia. We wear lippy. It's ridiculous. We're like infantile Australians. It's very funny. More questions?
Yes, Alfred, I'm sorry, we've lost your question, but it was about permanent phenomena. Did you want to ask that question?
Where's Alfred? Go, Alfred. Where are you, honey?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Go.
Well, it's just, you said that everything in the universe are either form, matter, or minds. Both.
Matter or minds, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's
actually a third type of phenomena, abstract phenomena, but we don't bother about that. But what's your, so in this context? So what was your question?
Okay, well, both impermanent phenomena, then how permanent phenomena could exist, like liberation, or and what are other examples of
Okay,
permanent
so there are
phenomena
those types of
besides
phenomena.
emptiness and
Yeah,
space?
I didn't include those. In the normal universe, I'm just talking about there's matter and there are minds. But then, of course, we have all the phenomena that are the absences of things, like emptiness is a permanent. But that was not. I didn't want to discuss those. But they're also
Okay.
exist now. There's lots of those
Okay,
as well.
so maybe in another class I could like ask.
What was the
how
question?
to-
What's your question?
well, yeah, it's like how can be easier to identify a permanent phenomenon? I mean, like absence of besides emptiness and space.
Yeah. So what's the question then? Say it
What
again.
examples of what examples of permanent phenomena exist
Okay.
besides
Anything that
emptiness in space?
Alex Berzin, for example, Alex Berzin would say that they're abstract phenomena, which is a good way to put it. And the only reason we even learn about these, Alfred, is so that we can get our head around the type of phenomenon that emptiness is. That's the real reason we learn about them. You know, so anything, the absence of something. So if this moment in time, there's no anger in your mind, we could say the absence of that anger in your mind is an abstract phenomenon, which is not impermanent, which is not changing from moment to moment. That kind of thing. I mean, any negation is an abstract, is a same kind of phenomenon. So it's only they're kind of conceptual ideas, you know. You wouldn't taste them or touch them or smell them or see them, but they're necessary to understand, in particular, so we can realize the type of phenomenon that emptiness is. Do you understand the point?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks, Alvin. Someone else.
A question from David. He asks, are there qualities in objects that are not projected or imputed by the mind?
That's a very good point. No. According to the Prasangika Madhyamika view, which is the view that the one we learned from our lamas, and it's the Gelugpa interpretation of this view, because the different traditions interpret differently. This is out of all the many interpretations about the nature of things, in particular emptiness, all the different viewpoints. There are many, many views coming from the time of the Hindus and over the centuries, the different Buddhist interpretations. Then, as far as the Prasangika Madhyamika is concerned, the middle way consequentialist school of thought, which is said to be the actual meaning of Buddha's teachings on emptiness, from the side of any phenomenon, a Buddha, a hell being, a toilet, a lamp, a person, there is nothing there. There's nothing there from its own side. This is the meaning of emptiness. There's not one atom, as Lama Zopa says, from the side of the lamp, the thing, the computer, whatever the person, there's not one atom there that makes it that thing. It is merely labeled by the mind. That's the simple answer. We can maybe go into this in more detail. So does that answer your question, David? Or do you have another question as a result?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So all the teachings were, see, what's interesting, the way the entire path to enlightenment is packaged, this Tibetan packaging that we call the Lam Rim, this gradual path, this course basically that culminates in you becoming a Buddha. All of these teachings, the first scope of teachings, which we've discussed, which is the essence of the fundamental teachings of karma, the explicit teaching there is to abide by the laws of karma and stop harming sentient beings. So you stop creating future suffering for yourself. But you could argue an implicit teaching there, as we move on the path, we're going to see that actually that it's actually karma is a perfect example of the first level of dependent arising, which is the main logic to use to prove emptiness. And that's leading us all the way when we get to the Bodhisattva path, having accomplished bodhicitta, we then engage in the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva. And it's at that point, at the 5th and 6th perfections, that we then delve into getting single pointed concentration, the 5th one, so that we can realize emptiness, the 6th one. So the entire path is leading us to that, which is very reasonable. If you want to become a physicist like Einstein, you've got to start with the junior school, entry level, learning to know mathematics, +1, subtraction and multiplication. And then you get more advanced. And everything is leading you to that understanding. You don't know it in the beginning. When you first abide by the laws of karma, you've got no idea that this is helping you understand emptiness. But that's what's implied by it, because it's a perfect example of dependent arising. And then you get to the second scope of teachings, like we're talking here, where we start to look into the Four Noble Truths and we start to go more deeply, having harnessed the energy of our body and speech, having disciplined our body and speech by living in vows and by lots of purification. We've removed some of the obstacles from our mind, and now we can get to the essence of the Buddha's point, the unique approach of Buddhas. This is where you become a Buddhist, where you learn to know the mind, which is the main delusion. The action is the one, but karma and delusion, the two causes of suffering, they're subsumed to the one. The delusions are the main cause. So it's only in the second level that we begin to understand the disturbing emotions, the afflictions, as they say. So that's the implicit, that's the explicit teaching there. But once we understand the teachings more and more, we're going to see the implicit meaning of understanding the delusions here is what we only really start to learn when we get to emptiness, which is the way that delusions function. In particular, the way that ego grasping, the root delusion, which is the one that we cut out from our mind when we realize dependent arising and emptiness. But in the middle scope, in high school, the implicit teaching is when we start to learn about the way these unhappy states of mind, the disturbing emotions, and that's the main emphasis, that's the explicit teaching. We're sick of the suffering of anger and the suffering of attachment. But we start to understand more subtly the way these states of mind function, and the way they function is as misconceptions. So initially that's quite a shock to us to think that that enormous emotion of attachment, that enormous emotion of grief, that emotion of anger, that they're coming down to being misconceptions. This really takes time to see. But when we begin to see this, that's the implicit teaching there, and that's really preparing us, just like understanding karma is, when we get to emptiness, to really more easily understand the function of ego grasping, ignorance, maripa, the root delusion that believes in the intrinsic me. So all of these stages prepare us for the final stages of practice, which is fairly evident in any body of knowledge. It's quite coherent. Everything leads to the next. It's pretty obvious. But like in the beginning, you don't realize that. It just seems like this bunch of abstract teachings. Don't kill, don't steal, understand your mind, give up attachment. It seems very random, you know, but the more we understand the whole path and how it becomes coherent for us, and we can join the dots and see the relationship between these different pieces, and it gives us great confidence then, because we understand the logic behind all the teachings, you know. So it all leads us towards emptiness. Emptiness is where we finally have to get to realize we're discussing here, the whole Buddhist view is about the nature of how things exist. And there are many levels at which things exist. And so here we're discussing the conventional way that things exist. When we finally get to emptiness, we're discussing the ultimate way that things exist. We're finally getting to the root of the problem. And we're going to understand ultimate reality. All this is leading us to it. Yeah. Any more questions?
Yes, from Chris. Chris says, thanks for your time and wisdom. Somewhat overwhelmed with information. I'm sorry. Is there a quote unquote junior/senior school book that you would recommend outlining the basic principles and practices of Buddhism?
There's hundreds of them, Chris. I don't know quite where to start. There's so many of them, you know. I mean, any book that's got the whole picture in it, that's called the Lam Rim. And there are some, but initially when we read it, it seems quite abstract and strange, because they talk about things that we don't kind of think about. But what I'm doing, so here, okay, so what to recommend? Chris, there are so many, you know. Any one of the Dalai Lama's books, but they're often on very specific topics, right? So where's Chris? Are you there? Are you a he or a her, Chris?
No, I'm here.
There you are. We met before.
Yeah, and you put me off fishing. And
did I really? I'm so sorry, Chris.
I stopped killing things.
Oh no, darling.
I destroyed millions of ants which were invading my house, which was a big problem to me at the time, whether I should kill them or not. But
what did you do, Chris?
I killed them.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. So
I haven't fished since I spoke to you about 2 years ago in Noble Park.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
How are you managing? Are you coping? You got grief or loss or something?
I am. You shamed me. Fishing shame. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Chris. And now I'm overwhelming you with too much information. I'm so sorry.
No, I've been through all of it, but just the basics. You
I
know,
understand.
I've read some
So
books.
what I could do for the big picture, the sort of all the components that we're talking about. I mean, there's in the last November at Kopan, Amy and Jason were there. We did this one. You know, I happened to be the one who was asked by Lama Zopa to teach the course, to be one of the teachers. And so we used as our course book this presentation of all these points. The Lam Rim, but in a very down-to-earth way, taught by me, because I can only teach in a down-to-earth way. So it's kind of touching on all those points. I mean, do you think, Jason, that would be a good book for Chris? The
Yes,
course,
I think so, definitely, because it's all these topics in
more detail, isn't it? Like all the stuff what we're talking about now, Chris. So do you like? I mean, it's going to be. I can send it to you as a digital one. You can, if you like, printed out things. You can print it out, or you can.
I really appreciate that. That would be very good.
I can send you that, and I can recommend a couple of others as well to sort of support it.
And it's good because you speak the same language as me, Australian. So
there you go, Chris. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I mean, I can send you a PDF, which is it's A5. So if you get it, if you like printed books instead, you've got to print it yourself. It's about 380 pages, so it's quite a bit. But it's the overview of everything we're discussing in this room here, in order, sort of thing. So it'll give you.
That would be amazing. Thank you very much.
I'm happy. I'll send you that. So you better email me, Chris. You better get my email. Get it from Jason.
I'll send Jason one.
Yes.
Could I do that? Yeah.
And he'll send the email. Good, Chris. Okay. Thank you so much. Very good. What else, Amy? Any more?
Yes, one from Sarah. Sarah says, I'm interested in the karma of teachers that we learn about the path from, especially teachers who act unethically. I work as a violence prevention researcher, and I find myself disappointed in past teachers who have been accused of or perpetrated abuse, and I can't reconcile learning from them anymore, despite having felt profoundly connected to them previously. It feels like a loss. So,
I'm sure it does. That's a big fat topic, isn't it? Who was this again? Sarah.
This is Sarah, and she goes on to say, what does this tell us about the karma of the teachers we look up to? What do we do with our feelings of disappointment in them? And what does that disappointment say about my mind or karma?
Exactly, Sarah. Are you there, Sarah? You want to show your face, darling? It'd be nice to talk to you directly.
Hi, Robina.
Where are you? Oh, there you go, Sarah. Good, sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a massive topic, darling. I do understand. So it's a really very interesting one. It's kind of multifaceted, many levels to it. So, I mean, it's a minefield, frankly. So first of all, one big learning, it's up to how you can take all this. I don't know how deeply you've got into the practice, and I don't know who you're talking about, but I understand exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. May I ask a couple of questions for you though, because that'll determine my answer, and I don't want to be personal in public, but have you taken initiations or any empowerments from this teacher?
I haven't, no, I haven't, but I studied.
Vows, anything like that? Nothing like that?
I haven't taken vows, no, but I studied as a kind of like I went to their center for many, many years.
I understand. I do understand. I understand exactly, Sarah. So my question is first to you is, did this particular person harm you?
No.
Okay, but you heard about harm he'd done to others, and you knew it was true. You know it's true. You trusted what you heard.
I trusted what I heard, but it's been very public, so it's escalated.
I do understand, darling. I do understand exactly, and I probably know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
so listen, there's various ways to approach it. Mm-hmm. So forget, you see, even if it's not, let's just forget even a spiritual teacher. Let's just say it's tennis. Sure. Let's say you're a tennis club and there's been this coach and he's never harmed you, and let's say it's a he, let's just say it is, it doesn't always have to be, and you've learned masses of tennis from this person and you're really grateful for what you've learned, right? Is that true?
Yes, I am.
Well, the point is this. There's so many approaches, but if you're taking it from the Buddhist point of view of wanting to learn mostly about your own mind. Mm-hmm. So as we progress and learn about our mind, what we're going to start to do, as we're discussing here, is that we're going to become less certain about what we're seeing in front of us. I mean, not in a negative sense, but in a good sense, because, I mean, we all know, like even just your ex-boyfriend, you and he might have had a terrible relationship, but now that boyfriend has got another girlfriend and they are really sweet and harmonious to each other. So we can really see that different people have karma with different people, don't they? We all know that. So then the main thing is we can't solve all the problems. If you're working to try and prevent whatever you said, fantastic. You support victims of violence. And if anyone comes to me who's been abused by somebody, depending on where that person is at, I will give them advice. If that person is completely overwhelmed by being a victim and they're full of fear and they've been bullied and brutalized by a person, my job is not to even worry about the person who did it, but is to help that person become strong and clear. So here I am talking to you, okay? So you've had this tennis coach and you've heard that he brutalized some people. So you know that you've got a lot of tennis from that, but you know that you don't want to continue there for these reasons. So the best way for you to practice, and the point is here, from our point of view, our main job is to protect our mind from being attached, angry, jealous, depressed, fearful. That's what our internal practice is. So if you take it from that point of view, you do everything in your power, you make a decision, I can't continue with that group, but I did get plenty of tennis from this person and I'm going to accept that and remember that. Now, many people will say, oh, you're just copping out. If he's violent, you should expose him and all that kind of thing. Now, if you wanted to do that, and that's the dangerous area, because what drives most of us when we expose people and get them arrested is not kindness to the person. It's not compassion, it's anger. So all we're doing is destroying ourselves. We might get the person locked up, but in the end, we haven't helped many people. We've just made a lot of fuss. We've created disharmony. We've created division. So it's a really fine balance to know when you should act to try and stop violence and when you know that even if you did act, it wouldn't help. And that's a big problem. So the point is, from the Buddhist perspective, as you progress practicing giving up attachment, which means you get clearer and clearer and not jumping all your projections onto people, and you give up your anger and you stop projecting onto people, and you will recognize, yeah, that's just the way the life is. People do this kind of thing, whether they're called spiritual or tennis players, which is unfortunate. And then you accept, is there something I can do? And if you know there isn't, because I know the case you're talking about, then you accept it, you leave, you take what you've got from it, and you protect your own mind from delusions. That's the first practice. Now, when you get more advanced and you get to the bodhisattva level and you've given up attachment and anger and you've even realized emptiness, you can do whatever needs to be done without disturbing your mind, but it would be coming from compassion, not anger. I remember look at like John Lewis, this recent American guy who died, he was part of you read about in the American papers or whatever, or Martin Luther King, for example. It is clear that that man has never stopped fighting against racism all his life, but he's not been angry. He said love is all that matters. So he's been brave, he's put himself on the line, he's been abused by the police, but he's always coming from love and the wish to help. And that was Martin Luther King as well. So there is a way to help, but sometimes we want to stick our noses in and get all righteous and upset. So it's a humble learning, because naturally when we get a spiritual teacher, we can't help but project perfection onto them, and then we're going to get disappointed. We're going to get disappointed, We're going to get disappointed. And that disappointment is because we have attachment that has projected our own needs onto somebody, whether it's a boyfriend or your tennis coach or your spiritual teacher. But if you're realistic and understand, and another whole level, and this is a difficult one, Sarah, if we understand the bodhisattva teachings, and this is it's a minefield for the West. Because in the West, we're very caught up in believing whatever we see. And if we're full of anger and we never think we have a viewpoint. We think if I'm angry, then my view is correct. I don't care how much people say. But if you're practicing Buddhism, you're lessening those delusions and you're starting to realize things exist at different levels for different people. There's different karma. But also if you understand the bodhisattva teaching, Sarah, we know it's possible that holy beings who have given up ego, who have given up attachment, at the level of being a bodhisattva, they can do things that look negative, but in fact are coming from compassion. Now, we don't like that in the West. We think that's a shocking teaching. And you don't know it's true because we're not clairvoyant. So if you want to protect your mind, you accept, okay, that happened. I've heard all those things, but I got the best from it and I will leave it there. But part of our problem is in the West, we want to have an opinion about everything. And we want to, and you can't solve all these problems. We're not clairvoyant. And when you understand the bodhisattva path and you hear outrageous outrageous stories from the past. I mean, even just one story. I remember when my mother met Lama Yeshe, my Lama, right? And she freaked out. He made her nervous and she got kind of upset with him. She, oh, that Yeshe, she'd say, that Yeshe. And I'm thinking, oh God, she's criticizing a Buddha, you know, whatever. Anyway, I heard this wonderful story. And this is exactly the Bodhisattva path. I mean, at the level, before I tell the story, when you get to the level of actually having bodhicitta, even if you haven't realized emptiness yet, you are a pretty outrageous human being. And you will do whatever it takes to connect with sentient beings. And you can even be, like we call it tough love. If you're a good mother, you will shout at your child. She might think that you're being mean to her, but you are using wisdom and genuine kindness, and you know that she needs to be disciplined. We know that's possible. Now, if somebody else didn't know you and didn't know your child, saw you shouting at your child, they will accuse you of being mean. But you know where you're coming from. So we even understand that at an ordinary level, and that's exactly how bodhisattvas are. They're so amazing, and they're going from life to life to life, connecting with human beings. And they will use any method possible to make a karmic connection because they don't want to leave you behind. When, you know, 27 lives later, they want to lead you to enlightenment. But the basis for that is having a karmic connection. Now, there's this, you know, they say that peaceful methods are the best. That's the best. But there's some people who are, you know, who aren't able to be hooked so easily with peaceful methods. So the bodhisattvas have to use wrathful methods. We love to hear these nice distant stories when we hear about Milarepa. But when we see it in front of us right now today, we can't stand it. We freak out, you know. So this lovely story when my mother was criticizing Lama Yeshe because he upset her, and I think he just hooked her because she was my mother. Anyway, never mind the story. But I heard this story about this one bodhisattva, you know, whatever it was, and they go from life after life after life, looking like regular Joes. They don't wear halos. They're not necessarily monks or nuns. They could be ordinary dudes, you know, but they're collecting merit, they're purifying, and they're hooking sentient beings so they can lead them all to enlightenment. That's their job. So this particular guy, a bodhisattva, a regular looking guy, he doesn't look like a holy person. He's in this village and he hooks everybody. He connects with everybody. He's made a karmic connection. So, but there was one old lady who didn't notice him and he didn't want to leave her behind. He needed a karmic connection. So he discovered she had this beautiful garden. So he rode his horse through her garden, destroying it. Now, excuse me, you wouldn't go, oh, there's a bodhisattva hooking somebody. You'd chuck the guy out of town and criticize him because how dare he upset this woman. But the point is, she now noticed him. She's shaking her fist and shouting and yelling, but finally he got her and he was so happy. So as one Lama said, who told this story, when it comes to karmic connections with bodhisattvas, it's better to have a bad karmic connection like she did. She abused him, or my mother got mad at Lama Yeshe, but Lama Yeshe hooked my mother. So 27 lives later, he can drag her to enlightenment. So then when we see even, and forget Tantra even, that's even more outrageous. But even the bodhisattva level, if we could understand it properly, is kind of intense. Because you do not, I mean, they have a saying in Tibetan, you do not know who anybody is, so don't judge. That's pretty heavy for us in the West. We don't like to think that way. So it's a very big thing to think about. But is this comfortable for your mind?
Yeah, I can see it. I think I perpetuate a bit of a sort of an attachment to my feelings about it because I've sort of, it sort of made me bow out a little bit of my practice.
That's right, I understand that because you get fearful. I know, it's like, I understand that, but really try and understand it and take away what you got from it and just leave it there because you're not calling. I mean, if you're not clairvoyant, Sarah, and this is of course the point in Buddhism, how can you know who anybody is? You cannot possibly know. Do you understand that, Sarah?
Yeah, I do. And I think something you've sort of highlighted that I sort of also, like, there's a lot of emotions attached to it. Like when I tell people that my previous teacher was this person who's very well known,
that's right.
They may have heard about it.
That's right. They all have an opinion. They all knows it. Well, you've got to keep your mouth shut, honey. It's not, you don't open yourself to being abused and criticized by people. Everybody in the West, we all love to have an opinion. We're also damn arrogant, you know. So you've got to protect your mind, Sarah, and leave it there. It's your own private business.
Yeah, and I like. Thank you for just highlighting that what I took from him was valuable.
That's fantastic. And that's not in the end. The point is, in the end, why not be more optimistic? Why be positive? But it's also very helpful to realize you don't know he's a bodhisattva. You do not know who he is. And this is a fact. But that's not easy for the West because we don't posit such possibilities. We just think what we see is real. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not an easy one. So don't open yourself to conversations with people. It's just not beneficial for you, Sarah. It will just keep stirring up the emotion. It's your private business, darling. Do you understand?
Yes, the same as my vegetarianism yesterday. Thank you.
There you go, honey. There you're exactly right. That's exactly right. We need to learn to mind our own business, and people need to learn that. People love to stick their fingers in our business and give us lectures. I mean, excuse me, it's so rude, you know.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, darling, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a really good point, Sarah.
Thank you.
We've got to do this meditation here. We're going to do the 4 opponent powers. We will. We've only got 20 minutes left. No, we've got an hour and 20 minutes, haven't we? Yeah, plenty of time. Okay, more questions.
Okay, Maria asks, why is it so easy to see others' habits and not be able to see our own negative and damage?
Very good point, Maria. Very good point. It's a very fascinating question. It's a really profound question. The very nature of attachment and anger and jealousy and depression and all those things, but in particular attachment. Okay, let's just stick to attachment. Again, let's look at the framework of attachment. There's thousands of these deluded states of mind. They all function in a similar way. They're very dualistic. They're exaggeration. They're distortions. They embellish the object. So all the delusions, and that's their nature. They're disturbing in the first place. They're disturbing, and they embellish. Okay, they don't see reality properly. They embellish. So there are thousands, but they all subsume to these three, the three poisons, Buddha calls it. And they all sound so cute, because when we learn about them at the first level, the simple level, they're taught at a very simple level, you know. We don't look at them in a very nuanced way. We don't see much relationship between them. We just see these three poisons. There's ego grasping, which is the root delusion that clings to the misconception of the self, the independent self. Then there's attachment to get what that self wants, this emotional hunger, this entitlement. And then there's the anger, the panic attack when attachment is thwarted. Excuse me, I have to have a drink. Where's my drink? Oh, there it is. Excuse me. All right, so the main one in day-to-day life is attachment. The ego grasping is so deep we don't even notice it really, but attachment is the one that really runs the show, and that's subtle enough. So like I said, it's a level of assumption. So it's dissatisfaction for a start. And then it's hungry, therefore, to get something to fill up the hole, to fill up the gaping hole and to stop the dissatisfaction. So then and when you hear that, it's really linked to anger, because when we're dissatisfied, that's what we all have. Our main voice is never happy with what we're doing. I'm never good enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. We always criticize ourselves. We exaggerate our ugliness. We exaggerate our fatness. We exaggerate our wrong shapes. We always see it in the negative. It's just the irony of ego. That's the way the delusions are. They always see the negative. So when they've got lots of attachment and there's no awareness of your own mind, attachment completely is absorbed in the outside world, in the objects. It's always looking for the nice shape, the nice smell, the nice taste, the nice color, the nice words, the nice person. So all the time, this attachment is like it's like the framework in our mind that is through which we see everything. So we're seeing everything in terms of whether or not it satisfies my needs. So that means we're going to find people and things that won't satisfy my needs. We're going to be always being critical, in other words, and that's what anger is. Anger is always going to find fault. So because we believe everything is out there, because we believe we're innocent, with this innocent victim, and as Lama Zopa says, we have no idea that what goes on in our mind plays any role at all. We think everything that we feel, because attachment always wants what is nice. When it meets a person, let's say, who's angry, the first thing we're going to notice is that they're not making me happy. They're being angry. And then we'll start pointing fingers and finding fault. And that's what we do about everything. Find fault in the weather, find fault in the shapes, find fault in the this, find fault in our boss. We never stop finding fault. And finding fault is anger, and it's the result of thwarted attachment. So that's just the way the world is. And look at everybody. That's what we do. We don't even pay attention to our mind. We're so disconnected from ourselves. And that's what Buddha's saying. And the more these delusions are there, the more externalized they are. Because as far as we're concerned, the world is literally out there. And all we're doing is interpreting it. constantly interpreting it. And we're always interpreting in terms of my needs. So I've got lots of dissatisfaction, which means lots of attachment. I'm going to have lots of anger, which means everyone I see, how dare they do that? Look at that person who's angry. Look at that person who's jealous. Look at that bad, ugly thing. Look at that terrible design over there. Look at that terrible food. Look at that horrible waitress. Everything is that. That's just the way samsara is. We're completely demented, in other words. And then we don't even know, as Lama Zopa says, that what goes on in here plays any role at all. So we don't think that it's my anger that thinks that person is horrible. We don't think that. We just think they are horrible. But as Lama Zopa says, the way the world appears back to us, the world out there appears back to us in the mirror of our mind. So if your mind is full of anger, full of attachment, full of jealousy, full of arrogance, guess how the world will appear to you? And you don't think it's your mind interpreting the world. We think it's the world. That's the way the world is. That's the epitome of samsara. And that's our mental illness. That's just the way it works. So that's why that first level of practice of beginning to look at our mind, as discussed with Sarah, is profound. In other words, if we're trying to do the wisdom wing, which is the work of first controlling your body and speech, then beginning to become familiar with your mind, every second of the day is the most perfect opportunity. So there you are, you're walking down the street, or you're in the cafe. You're in the cafe waiting for your cake to come. And your attachment is is hungrily anticipating the cake. And the more your attachment is anticipating the cake, the more irritated you'll be if it takes too long. And so then naturally you'll be critical of the waitress. You'll be critical of the cake. You'll be critical of the cook because you're never satisfied. So if we're trying to practice, then we first have to recognize there's two things going on. There's the person out there, there's the cake out there, there's the waitress out there, there's the cafe, there's the cook. These are the external phenomena, and they are there, and there is a cake there. But then there's my mind every millisecond interpreting the cook, the cafe, the cake, the waitress. And that's what we have to learn to become familiar with. Now, the cake might be terrible. The waitress might even be rude. That's not a mistake necessarily to think that she's being rude, but our job is to be conscious of what my mind is doing, the interpretations I've got. And that's the real practice of the wisdom wing after we've begun to control our body and speech. That's the work of being a Buddhist. Every second of the day, there's the event out there, and then there's my interpretation of it. And our job is to become intimately, profoundly, super clearly familiar with every millisecond of my thoughts and distinguish whether they're neurotic, deluded, or virtuous. That's it. Does that answer the question, Maria?
It certainly does. I'm
good. I'm happy.
Crazy, Robina.
Exactly. I know. This is hard. This is the hardest job we'll ever do. But this is the addiction. We're all addicted to these delusions, and we don't. As Lama Zopa says, and it's very shocking to think this, the vast majority of all humans on the planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. And of course, you add to that, not only do we not know that what goes on in our mind plays any role, we don't know what goes on in our mind, period. We just think whatever we feel is a truth. You don't even think, to say that's a really delicious cake, it's simply a viewpoint. But we don't think it's a viewpoint. We think it's an objective reality. And that's the nightmare of the samsaric states of mind. That's the nightmare. And that's why this job is pretty intense. To become familiar with your own mind every second is pretty intense, And to recognize, is it virtue or is it delusion? Because there's only two options. And that's the hard work. Which doesn't mean the cake wasn't horrible. It doesn't mean the waitress wasn't horrible. You're not as if you're wrong. You might have been right relatively, but that's our job when it comes to the wisdom wing, is to work on our mind. That's the point, and that's what's intense. And that's my point to Sarah. Do you understand, Maria?
Yes, absolutely.
And when you add karma to it, at least you have an explanation of why that event occurred. It's your karmic appearance, as Lama Zopa said. Everything that appears to us is the reflection of the result of our own past actions and the reflection of what's in our mind. That's why, you know, Lama Yeshe's book, Mahamudra, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really wonderful. It talks a lot. It's called Mahamudra, How to Discover Our True Nature. And it's a technique for meditating on the emptiness of your mind. It's really marvelous. And the Lama taught so simply. And it talks a lot about the nature of this mind of ours, and the mind, the way we're talking, how it's first naturally clear. And when we've removed the delusions, then this is the result. The result is we become happy, blissful and clear and virtuous. But the other thing about the mind is the way they describe it as like a mirror. And it's a really good analogy. As the way Lama Zopa says, everything out there appears back to us in the aspect of what's in our mind. And we can kind of see it. If you know a person is always angry, if you know a person is always angry, it's so clear that their mind is projecting, you know, because not another person who's patient, seeing the same thing, literally sees something different. We can really see how it's interpretation, you know. It's very fascinating. Our mind, and it's like, so as Lama Zopa Yeshe says, our mind is like a mirror, which is a really unusual way to talk about our mind because we don't think like that. That everything appears back to us in the shape, if you like, or the aspect of whatever is in our mind. So this is why Buddha's saying literally our mind makes things up. It seems pretty abstract to us, but the more we become familiar with our mind, the more we're going to see this, you know. So it's kind of powerful. And of course, as Lama Yeshe says, with them like a mirror, if a mirror is clear, then what it reflects is accurate. Like even if got a body of water and there's a riverbank. On the riverbank, there's a tree. Well, if the water is completely clear and still, we know the tree will be reflected accurately. But if the water's turbulent, then all we see is a crooked tree. And that's the way Buddhism talks about conceptuality. And this sounds pretty abstract to us. But the way conceptuality works, which is the level we live at, we only see the reflection of everything. We don't see things at all. We see the reflection. So if your mind is agitated, everything will look ugly. If your mind is very happy, even if you see horrible things, your mind will be different. You'll interpret things differently. You won't be stupid. You'll see that someone being violent, but it'll generate compassion or empathy with you, not anger. So it's so clear that there is stuff out there, there is reality, but our mind is the main creator of it, and then past karma is the cause of why we see it or why it happens, and then our mind now is how it interprets it. So that's the hard work, working on the karma, understanding why things happen, and then understanding the mind, this particular Buddhist model of the mind, how attachment functions, how anger functions, and these are two fundamental ones, and we're running between these like 1,000 times a day, and it's really much more subtle than these words would actually convey. I mean, if you go to a therapist, you know, and you say, oh, I've got so much attachment today, they won't even know what you're talking about. It sounds so simplistic. It sounds so silly because we don't use this model at all. You understand? Thank you so much, Maria. What else? Amy?
Yeah. Francis asks, I understood from you.
Who asked?
Francis? This is from Francis.
Francis, okay.
Francis asks, I understood from you that we are the boss of our minds. Where is the place for our minds in emptiness?
Well, to answer that question, we have to understand what emptiness means. Okay, it's just a big question, but we have to get clear what that emptiness means. Otherwise, there's no meaning to the answer. So maybe I need, who was that again? Francis. Are you there, Francis? Where are you, honey? Are you there? No. Where's Francis?
Francis, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
There you go, Francis. So you have to, I think before I answer, I'd like you to explain your question to me. What do you mean by that question?
Okay, Robina. So I've written some things down that you said today, and you said, so we like Buddhism, then we get to know Buddhism, then we practice Buddhism, then keep practicing it daily. And I feel like I moved a bit from kindergarten to junior school there thinking, wow, like after 52 years of teaching, I now have another job. I can actually concentrate on my mind, and I can even determine things that may happen in my next lifetime. I was really sort of like, wow, this is amazing. Then you mentioned the word emptiness, and I couldn't connect where my mind was in relation to emptiness.
Okay, so just to be clear about that question, so tell me what you're thinking at this moment, what you think this emptiness means. I'd just like to hear what you mean by that, because then I'll sort of understand your question. What do you mean by emptiness? What do you mean by emptiness, Francis?
Well, to me, emptiness means absolutely empty, nothing. I mean, I can't. Emptiness means not connecting with other things. Emptiness means not depending on stuff or having relationships, or emptiness means other than what I have lived my life as.
Okay, so you're not talking about Buddhist emptiness at all. You're talking about something very depressing.
Yeah, well, yes, I'm talking about things that I think have existed in my life up until now.
Oh, that's interesting. So then now we're communicating. So then can we use another word for emptiness? Because that's not Buddhist emptiness.
Yeah, please.
So you tell me what you mean, give another word. What do you mean by that?
I suppose it would be less of an attachment to things. I think not having attachments, maybe less judging on things on how they relate to me and other people. So some sort of
okay, I'll put it this way, Francis. Yeah, that is the result of practice. When you first start practicing, you control your body and speech. You stop lying, jumping on too many boys, eating too much cake. Why do you do that? Because those are actions done by the servants of your mind, which is your body and speech, and they're driven by attachment and anger. You can get that, can't you?
Yeah, I get it.
That's the first level of practice, pretty profound. But as you progress with that and become more disciplined, you're going to find the consequence for you is more contentment. Because we keep doing, Buddha's whole point, which we learn more about in the middle scope in high school, his main point is that anger and attachment and jealousy and all those, which we think are so natural, and they are natural, they're very disturbing to us. You see, this is our problem. We think the husband is disturbing. We think the mean sister is disturbing. But the anger itself is what Buddha's saying. The jealousy itself, the depression itself, the constant dissatisfaction of attachment itself is what causes us suffering. That's the key point he's making. So at the first level of practice, we then have to attempt to control the servants of those voices. That means we stop following attachment and eating too much cake. We stop following attachment and jumping on too many boys. We stop following, attachment and killing the fish and killing the cockroaches, which is poor Chris is finding out. So, I mean, that's because of past karma. You bump your meat fishing, it looks delicious to you. You don't realize, you're killing a fish, but we don't think of the fish as suffering. So the Buddha would say by following the attachment and following our karmic imprints and following anger, we don't realize it because we just think we're born this way. But by following them, we're increasing our suffering. We're increasing our agitation. We'll never get satisfied. So the very first level is don't worry about your mind yet. Just harness your body and speech. Attempt to not harm sentient beings. It's a pretty good guideline. And the consequence for us is we become more peaceful, less neurotic, because we're not feeding the attachment and the anger. So that's the very first level of practice. We are the beneficiary of it. Instead of hearing it as something that someone says I shouldn't do because I'm naughty, which is really ridiculous, it's a method to get more content. Then we get to the next level because we've harnessed our body and speech to some degree. And now we start to learn the Buddhist model of the mind. We start to learn the Four Noble Truths, and we start to go more deeply into the mind to become intimately familiar with attachment and anger and the other neuroses. And I mean in a very precise way, not just the feeling level, but as we start to meditate, we start to get a bit of focus. We're going to start to get a bit deeper and see the conceptual level, the conceptual story that underpins those emotions. And then we're going to start unpack and unravel those conceptual stories and then start to believe in them less, to start to buy into them less, and that increases our contentment, and that increases our satisfaction, and that increases our well-being. And then we can go further into the compassion wing. We start to even now develop empathy and connectedness with others even more profoundly. So this is the kind of the levels of practice. So all this time we are the beneficiary of this. We have to realize that this methodology is to help me become more content and more wise and more helpful. And then I can start to see that we're all in the same damn boat. And now I see that everybody else is driven by the same rubbish. Look at the pain they're experiencing and look at the harm they're doing to each other. So I'm beginning to have an empathy to want to help others do the same thing. This is the progress of the path. So then we finally, all the time, weakening the habits, weakening the delusions, growing the virtue, growing our contentment. We go progressively moving towards becoming this marvelous human human being. And then we finally get to the end result where we start to look into the deepest delusion, where we cut the root delusion that completely believes in this intrinsic, concrete, solid, definite, separate me, which is the most subtle mistake. And then we become liberated. We become this blissful, radiant being who understands reality, who understands karma, who understands the mind, is blissfully clear, blissfully happy, and blissfully compassionate and wise. And we bop along life after life helping others. That's the path. Does it answer your question or not?
Yes, it answers part of my question.
Which bit? Okay, what's the bit? Ask me in another way.
The bit is the word emptiness.
I know, but when I asked you your interpretation, you had your own interpretation, like missing things and depressed and everything. So that's not the meaning of emptiness.
No, I don't think that's what I meant. I think I find it difficult.
What do you mean then?
Well, I mean, say I went to the cupboard and there was nothing there, it would just be plain and simply empty.
That's right, but that's not the meaning here.
No.
That's not the Buddhist meaning at all. What the Buddhist meaning of emptiness is, I mean, to speak simply, Buddha's saying that we have these misconceptions in our mind about reality. Can you hear that, Francis?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Attachment believes the cake will make me happy.
Yes.
Anger believes that he's the cause of my suffering. We start to question those. And then we start to realize that what we thought existed doesn't. So that, in a sense, the thing that we thought existed, that delicious cake, doesn't exist like that. You could argue that that's the emptiness of the fantasy you made up. In a simple way, it's referring to the absence of all the fantasies, absence of what our fantasy made up. But the deepest emptiness, the subtlest one, is the fantasy of an intrinsic, inherent me, which of course is the subtlest one to understand. When we realize that that fantasy me that has made up attachment and made up anger and made up enemies and made up friends, that it's a fantasy. So then we're going to realize the absence of all that nonsense. That's what emptiness is referring to, generally speaking. It's a good absence. You realize the things you've been believing in for so long have never existed.
I got it.
Thank you. Good, darling.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah, you get rid of the nonsense, and you realize the things that you've been believing in all these years, delicious cakes and divine boyfriends and ugly ex-husbands, are not what you thought. That's the simplest. Yeah. Good, darling. Wonderful.
Thank you, Robina. I got it.
That's a pleasure. Good, darling. Yes, Amy. More questions. Unmute.
Yes, sorry. A question from Rosemary. She asks, Venerable, we were with you in November 2016 when Trump became president of the US. You said at the time that he might well be a bodhisattva. I'm interested to ask if or how we can still try to see him that way.
I know. Okay.
Because of what you're saying about what we misunderstand, what we're seeing.
I know. This is a really hard thing to understand. This is the point I'm talking to Sarah. This is coming from the Bodhisattva path point of view, which is just outrageous for the ordinary world. Okay? I mean, use a simple example of a mother who uses tough love. This is a simple example of the principle that I'm making, which is what we understand. If you're a good mother and you see your child is unruly, is undisciplined, and you're trying so hard to help them, and you know the only method has to be you go to your room now. And because if they trust you and they haven't listened to your gentle words, you know that you're coming from the right place. You know that's tough, what we call tough love. You're truly doing it for the sake of your child. We absolutely understand that principle. We absolutely understand that. So you just take that principle to an extreme degree. And you've got the possibility. I mean, that man who ran through the lady's garden, nobody would have seen her do. She wasn't being gentle. He was being really mean to her. He destroyed her garden. If they would have chucked him out of the village. they didn't, nobody would have been clairvoyant. Nobody would have known who he is. Nobody would have known he's a bodhisattva. Nobody would know he had a pure motivation. Nobody would know he's got long-term wisdom that realizes that he's going to hook this woman, and in 27 lifetimes when she's ready, he can lead her to enlightenment. Who's got that view? What a bizarre view. We don't think that like that in our world. So with that understanding that when you get to the level of being a bodhisattva, you have given up ego grasping. If you realize that, if you're an Arya bodhisattva, you have given up ego grasping. You have realized how things exist. You have incredible bodhicitta. You have amazing, amazing clairvoyance. You see the people's past, their future. You know exactly their minds. You know exactly how to help them. We don't have views like that in our world. That's why it's such an abstract idea. But all we're doing is talking from this perspective. So if you can posit that as a possibility, anything's possible. I remember one time, you hear stories all the time in the literature. When you read about the past lives of Milarepa, and because he had heavy negative karma, he killed many people, and his guru, Mapa, wasn't it? Mapa, treated him so badly, chucked him out of class, beat him up, made him build things and pull them down again. I mean, Mapa would have been put in prison, Sarah. He would have been put in prison for abuse. But if he is a holy being, and this is what's too hard for us, forget, this is not the world's view. It's not the world's view. But if we take simple examples, like the mother using tough love, it's that principle. We do understand that principle. We do understand that principle. So, for example, one story, Lama Yeshe, this is a story years ago about our friend Harry, who was a monk, and he was at Kopan Monastery. This is back in the early 80s, very early 80s. And Harry was helping one of the monks there, one of the Sherpa monks, who was very sick. And he'd found a doctor for the monk. And he happened to mention to Lama Yeshe, and Lama Yeshe is Harry's Lama, his guru, my guru too. And so, he told Lama he'd found a doctor to help this monk. And basically Lama said to Harry, he doesn't need a doctor, he'll be right, you leave him alone, it's okay. So Harry trusted Lama's wisdom. Well, the fact is this monk got sicker and sicker. And then he went up to the mountains, he was a Sherpa, and he died. Now that would seem like Lama Yeshe is beyond cruel. Lama Yeshe let this guy get sick and die, looking like he didn't care. Now, what's going on here? An ordinary level, you could sue the man for being so cruel. But if Lama is what he was said to be, a highly evolved being, and in the Buddhist view, what does that mean? The bare minimum, he's got clairvoyance because he's got single point of concentration. I mean, Lama Yeshe goes into great detail in the Mahamudra book. This is in the Buddhist literature. It's a 3,000-year-old technique. It's completely part of the Indian culture. But what do we know about that in modern psychology? We just think there are a load of weird wackos in India, they make stuff up. We have no understanding of this view. This is a technique that's been around for thousands of years, and you access a subtle level of mind, and that level of mind can cognize phenomena that are more subtle than the conceptuality and the sensory, which includes the past, the future, and crucially the minds and the karma of others. This is a fundamental prerequisite to begin to help sentient beings, is to cultivate this. So Lama had that bare minimum. He not only had that, he realized emptiness. He could see, he understood reality, and not only that, he had bodhicitta. He was a highly evolved being. So that means he can see the mind of this monk and the past karma, who knows how many lives back. So he can see clear. So Lama Lundup, the abbot, explained to Harry and said, because Lama could see clearly this monk's mind, he could see clearly the karma that he had created, and he could see clearly that if he had had a doctor, he would have gotten better and he would have had a fine life. But the karma that he'd created was so heavy that it wouldn't have been finished, and the next life would have been much, much worse suffering. Whereas Lama could see clearly with his wisdom that by having the sickness now, he went up to the mountains and he died, in fact, a very good death with his family. He died very peacefully. By having the sickness and dying young, he purified all that karma, and next life, fantastic. Now, who's got that level of wisdom in our culture? Nobody. All I can do is tell you this, and it's up to us if we take this view seriously as a possibility. That's because that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is not just being a clever person. It's seeing reality. It's removing the delusions from our mind, removing attachment, removing the delusions which blind us. We're as blind as bats because we see everything through the lenses of our own neuroses. So we think what we're seeing is reality. It's a complete joke. So we've got to lessen the delusions, get rid of them, get concentration, realize emptiness, get bodhicitta. Then we are qualified to know how to help people with whatever method is necessary. There's a story about the Buddha, a past story, one of the Buddha's past lives, a famous story. It's one of these past lives where he was the captain on some boat. There were 500 merchants. And with his clairvoyance, with his wisdom, with his emptiness, with his bodhicitta, with his crystal clear mind that can see eons in the past, this is what our mind is capable of. He can see clearly with his clairvoyance that one of the guys is going to kill everybody and take everything for himself. So he had such compassion for the guy who had had countless lifetimes of incredible suffering on the basis of this terrible action, that he decided from his compassion, I would rather suffer instead. I would rather go to the lower realms instead. So he killed the guy to prevent him from doing this for the guy's sake. Of course, this is a demented idea for us in our culture. We can't even imagine not having attachment. We can't even imagine not having anger, not to mention no attachment, no anger, and clairvoyance, and bodhicitta. It's demented for us. It's just outrageous. So this is the framework for these things. So that's what Tibetans would say. With this framework, we've got no idea who anybody is, you know. There's so many stories like that. So not only did he not create any negative karma, but that amount of compassion he had, rather that he had the suffering of the future suffering realms, rather me than him, he was prepared to have that countless lifetimes of suffering instead of this person having suffering. I mean, who's got that level of compassion? It sounds crazy. He not only didn't create any negative karma, that level of compassion of killing the guy for his sake, it hastened his Buddhahood. This is the Bodhisattva teachings. Forget the tantric teachings, which are even more outrageous. So that's the framework. Within that framework, you don't know who anybody is. Well, we just judge it based on our pathetic narrow-mindedness, our pathetic attachment and our anger, and we think we're smarty pants. We know everything. We're just so deluded. Our minds are so small, you know. This is the perspective of the Buddhist view of the mind. So does that help? Or not?
Yes, thanks for.
Okay, but the other point is this, honey. Then we think, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Everybody could be a Buddha. What am I supposed to do? We think we'll go crazy. No, act according to reality. Mr. Trump maybe is not so cool with his politics, so don't vote for him. It doesn't mean he's not who he is. You don't know. He might be helping. I mean, even I remember one time years ago hearing some Tibetans say, it's not too difficult for Tibetans to think that Mao Zedong was a Buddha, who with his infinite wisdom in 1,000 lifetimes could see, but by having all this suffering, that Tibetans purified their negative karma and hastened their Buddhahood, just like that monk who died. I mean, it's an outrageous view. But if we don't have clairvoyance, which as Buddha says is a fundamental part of our mind, we can't begin to even lift a finger to help people. We have to do something without it. But then we begin to see their minds. And the example of Lama Yeshe, that takes courage to do an action like that. So it's a pretty intense view. And all we're going to do is study it and try to understand it and at least see if there's some reasonableness to it, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you treat things accordingly. So, you know, if a person comes up to you with a gun and you say, oh, it could be a Buddha, I'll let him shoot me. No. Have a clear view. Do something to solve, you know, to get rid of the guy if you got a gun. So, you know, shoot his foot or something, or grab his gun from him, or whatever. But anything's possible. But meanwhile, you live according to life, and you see damage, you see harming. If you see a guy kick a dog, try and protect the dog. But if you have real compassion, you'd also be doing it for the sake of the guy. You see my point?
Yeah.
It's a whole different view. You still live according to the rules of reality, you know. I remember one Lama, this is for Sarah again, in another tradition, apparently was sleeping around with his students or something, and then his boss Lama basically said to the students, he treated it like a very conventional. He didn't give any big dramatic teaching about he could be a Buddha. He said, well, that's okay. You know, don't invite him to come to teach. He treated it according to the way the world is. And I mean, these bodhisattva ideas and tantric ideas are too much for our mind in the West. It's like, so we just treat them ordinary. So you be respectful. And if you hear about a teacher who's damaging people, don't go to that teacher. They might be the Buddha, but if you can't see that and if you don't have confidence, leave it alone. You know, be reasonable, use your wisdom, be intelligent, and live according to the laws of the world, you know.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yes.
You understand?
Yep. Yep. Thanks. That's really helpful.
Just keep practicing, keep not believing in our karmic appearances, keep seeing our mind, keep trying to practice one step at a time, get some wisdom, and then, you know, keep moving. That's it.
Thanks.
According to our own level, you know, come to our own pace.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think I want to talk a bit more about, go back to the technology, the mechanics. Like I said before, and I touched on this briefly yesterday, the business of using that young fisherman as an example. Not personal, Chris, it's all right. An example of an action that harms another. And we can see this. This is the point. We can really see how this is. You can look at, for example, look at somebody who's really attached to sex. He might be a really nice, let's say it's a guy, and he really is not an angry person. He doesn't want to rape anybody. He's not like violent. He just likes having sex with pretty girls. So we know, and this is why attachment is like a honey-covered razor blade. And that's why fishing doesn't look like it's violence. Chris didn't go out there and beat the fish on the head. It's, you know, so things done from attachment, a honey-covered razor blade, they look like they're benign. So fishing is not it is violent. Actually, for the fish, it's pretty violent, but it doesn't look like it's violent. So a person who likes girls, if he's not a rapist, he's got to seduce girls. I mean, that's the whole point. That's how we do with each other. Or a girl seduces a boy. So when seducing somebody means you look like you like them, and you do. You want to get into their pets. So you're not going to rape them. So what are you going to do? You're going to dress up nicely and take them out, and then you're going to flatter them and so they're going to be, so that you can hop into bed with them. I mean, it's pretty evident. We all do this all the time. We all try to be nice to people because our attachment wants to be seen as a good person. So seduction is a really powerful example of the gross way attachment works. You manipulate a person by being lovely to them, and then they're putty in your hands, and then you hop into bed with them, and then say, bye-bye, see you next, not see you again, you know. That's just normal. We all do that all the time because of attachment. So attachment is really hard to see. So attachment, you know, is really manipulative. It's really manipulative. So when you've got, so the point is this, when you function mainly from attachment, but you know, you might be a really friendly person, you're not angry, but you know, the food that you're attached to will look way more delicious than it really is. That's why you get really excited. That's why you anticipate it. That's why you look forward to the pleasure. And that's why the disappointment is to that degree, because it didn't bring you any satisfaction. So the attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of something. So if a fisherman, this little boy, this is the way the karma is, this past karmic tendency, it's been in the lower realms in the past, the Buddhist view would say, he's finished the heavy level of killing karma, that's completed. He's run that karma out of that particular track. But then he gets a human body like a miracle, but he hasn't purified all aspects of killing. So he's got the residual results, in his case, of the habit to keep killing. The second way karma ripens, your tendencies. And the third one, in fact, he got that too. He died young. He died scuba diving when he was 29. So his karma ran out. So that's the two of the three results in this life of killing. Maybe if he'd had environmental karma of killing, he might have got sick all the time, but I don't think he had that. So he had the tendency to keep killing because he hadn't purified all aspects of the killing. And that means, like I said, the second he met fishing, he didn't have the thought to kill fish until he met fishing or saw something that triggered fishing in his mind. So the karmic imprint was there, the habit, the familiarity with that action. So that's just sitting latent in his mind. Then he meets the condition, and that triggers the karmic seed, and it's like a memory. It would have looked, he would have run like a magnet to it. It would have looked really delicious to him because of the attachment, but the pleasure would have been really intense. Now, I remember reading about an Australian writer, remember Robert Hughes, he wrote many books about Australia. He was an Australian journalist, and he was the arts writer for like 40 years for Time magazine in America, right? And he was a really prolific writer and a very good writer, very powerful with his words. I remember him talking about his love of fishing, and he talked about this first time he went trout fishing. It was like a cosmic experience. So meaning he got enormous pleasure. This is not criticizing anybody, it's just karmic imprints. So the person, like my friend on death row in Kentucky, who gets pleasure from torturing, a pedophile gets pleasure from jumping on little girls, a thief gets pleasure from stealing. This is the point, and the pleasure is pleasant feelings, and that's triggered by the extent of the pleasure that's triggered for Robert Hughes. The extent of the pleasure, he said it was a cosmic experience, was the extent of the karmic connection with killing. I remember him describing how he killed He used, you know, how he would kill like crabs or something, you know. And it's just, so what's really evident, this is the point about attachment, the attachment that guy has for that girl, he's got no interest in her feelings. He's got no interest in what she thinks or feels. He just sees a pretty girl and he's got to get what his attachment wants, so he has to seduce her so he can get his pleasure. That we all do that. The fisherman did that. So as soon as he saw fishing, it triggered that karmic imprint. The extent of the karmic imprint equals the extent of the pleasure in his mind. And then the next millisecond, attachment kicks in and makes it look totally divine. Now look at sexual pleasure. Look at it. Look at the level of pleasure when we call it that word. But there's no difference between pleasure when you eat a cake or pleasure when you jump on a buoy. It's just the level of pleasure, which indicates the level of attachment we have to sexual contact, which means that we have the intense karmic imprint from animals, from humans, from countless lives. It shows how deep that habit is in our mind. That's why it triggers so much pleasure. The pleasure is equal to the karmic habit. And then the attachment makes it look utterly divine. So this is how we are locked into believing in our karmic appearances. No one ever thinks of past lives. No one ever thinks of karmic imprints. We don't know why the pleasure comes. So naturally for Robert Hughes, fishing was an incredibly blissful experience. It's practically like having sex. So why sexual pleasure is so intense pleasure, because of the extent of the habit from past lives. The amount of pleasure equals your habit. So the torturer must have strong habit from torturing in a past life, probably as an animal. Animals torture each other. It's very simple. So the level of pleasure in terms of negative actions is equal to the habit that you've got to do that action. So, and this is my point now, and to that degree, that fisherman never could see the suffering of the fish. His mother went fishing with him one time. She never liked fishing. She didn't want to criticize her boy, but she didn't like fishing. So this is the point. She didn't have attachment to killing. She didn't have the karmic imprint to kill the fish. And this is an example. I mean, the world, look at the harm the world does to everybody. I mean, look at the torturer, look at the rapist. I mean, this is just, the point is, when you're overwhelmed by your own story, all you see is your projection, and you know vaguely, maybe, if you're raping someone, you can know vaguely their suffering, but even their suffering gives you more pleasure because you're a bit sadistic as a rapist, you know? So the fisherman, he went fishing how many years? And he must have had hundreds of thousands of fish in his boat over those years. And he was a kind man. He didn't put hooks in his mother's mouth. It was due to the karma of fishing, but he never saw suffering. He saw these fish flapping in the boat. He saw them flapping their bodies, but he never interpreted it as the fish not happy. That's the point. You know, that girl, maybe when the boy's really attached to sex and she's maybe crying, he's so overwhelmed by his own attachment, he simply can't see the suffering. That's how we all are. We can't see the harm we do to others when we do it via attachment. Because all we're seeing is desperately, frantically trying to get our needs fulfilled. That's why we harm each other. So it's just so what I'm getting, the technology of it is the extent of the karmic habit is equal to the extent of the pleasure you get when it's a negative action is what I'm talking. And therefore the extent of the attachment that makes it look utterly divine, like a cosmic experience for Robert Hughes. And then, of course, what you see is something divine. You don't see the suffering. I mean, a really vivid example, I mean, in America years ago, there was this one guy, I forget what city, it was in Kansas, I think. They don't have the death row there. So he confessed to killing like 35 people. He called himself BTK. Bind, torture, kill. For 35 years, he had a regular guide looking. So, of course, he hid all this part of his life. No one could see it. He had this kind of dungeon, this custom-built dungeon, and he would kidnap people, always more than one. He would bind them. He would torture them. And he would, as he said, when he had to confess to the 35 murders in the courtroom, that he got what he called sexual pleasure. Don't misunderstand this. Pleasure that we call sexual is just very intense pleasure. That's all. So, you know, Robert Hughes practically got it. He said cosmic experience. The torturer would get incredible pleasure from torturing. So because you see, this is the point about samsara. We are all desperate for pleasure. We only want happy feelings. This is what drives us every second of our lives. We are desperate to get happy feelings. We happen to be fairly mild in our wish to get pleasure, so we eat cakes and talk to each other and see movies. We don't torture, rape, kill. Luckily, we at least don't do that, but we're driven by attachment. The attachment's job is to find the event, to find the person, to find the object that will trigger that pleasure. And when we find it, we think that object is beautiful. And so, of course, we think it must be lovely because it brings me pleasure. So we're living in this incredible lie we have made up. It's a really tough one, this. Are we communicating, people? So we get trapped in our own misconceptions. That's the point, because we're desperate for pleasure. We know that, look how hard it is to give up eating cake. Forget about pedophile. Forget about torturer. You understand? Just cake is how hard to give it up, because we can't. Attachment is frantic to get that pleasure. We can't stand the thought of not getting it. So we become completely paralyzed and is driven by our attachment. This is what Buddha means by being in samsara, you know. So it means questioning everything, all our assumptions, looking into our mind really deeply, unpacking and unraveling these conceptual stories, which are so primordially deep. We come programmed from the first second of conception with these misconceptions, you know. So it's hard work, but it's possible. I think we can do the purification practice now. We can do that to end. Okay. So any questions about all that before we do the purification practice? We'll give ourselves a 5-minute break for a second. Any questions for a second? We'll have a break and then we'll do the meditation.
There was a question from Dale. Because of our attachment, are all emotions therefore disturbing emotions?
No, of course not. We have all the virtues: love, compassion, kindness, generosity, you know, what all of those. They're our saving grace. They're not deluded. They're marvelous. They're marvelous. That's the point. As we lessen the neurotic ones, we can grow the good ones naturally. As we get less attachment, we're going to have less projections, less grasping, less anger, and we're going to naturally be able to have more love. So the virtues are also emotions. I mean, you can have incredible compassion. You bring tears to your eyes, can't it? It's a mix of attachment, but compassion is a virtue. You're seeing suffering of others. So people, somehow, a person who has compassion for the fish, maybe they went in the boat and they saw the fish flapping, they would have been weeping with compassion because they saw the fish suffering. The mother saw the fish suffering because she didn't have the attachment to killing and she didn't have the misconceptions. So the virtues are good, and the virtues are valid because they're linked, they're connected to others. They're not deluded. They're they're not deluded conventionally. Delusions are related to self. Attachment is an expression of a frantic need to get what I want. Virtues are related to others. They're interconnected to others. They're also emotions, absolutely. The moment now, we don't have pure love and pure compassion because they're polluted by attachment. But that's what we have to learn to see our minds and begin to discriminate between them, you know. Do you understand? Dale? Good, John. It's an important point. Otherwise, you chuck the baby out the bathwater, you know, that's no good. Anything more? No?
No more questions in the chat.
Well, I need my voice. I've been shouting, I think, as usual. So I'll give myself a 5-minute break and we'll do the meditation, okay? So relax for 5 minutes.